American Vampire Volume 5, Part 1, Lord of Nightmares. Written by Scott Snyder, art by Dustin, Nguyen. Alright, Volume 5. Now this volume is really long, so I'm going to be separating it into 2 videos. This video is going to be Part 1, covering the Lord of Nightmares storyline. And then the next video is going to cover the Blacklist storyline, which will end the first cycle of American Vampire, where afterwards Scott Snyder took a little bit of a break and then came back to it later. But for now, we're going through the Lord of Nightmares, and for this one, Scott Snyder is digging into the vampire lore, and he is giving us his take on Dracula. And I really like what Scott Snyder does with Dracula in this miniseries, and the sort of mythology he builds with Dracula. So it's going to be some pretty good fun. Let's dive into it. Volume 5, The Lord of Nightmares. Issue 1. In 1872, the king of the Carpathian vampires, known as Dracula, the first Carpathian vampire, the father of the species. He was captured in 1872, and eventually he was transferred to a secret underground Vassals of the Morning Star base beneath the London Tower Bridge in England. The base was built with the bridge itself. Dracula, he was transferred here and moved to a specifically built bunker beneath the base. And that is where he stayed captive under VMS security until now. The year is 1954, London, England. Lyndon Hobbs, who's the leader of the Vassals of the Morning Star, is having some tea out on the patio. He gets joined by a man named Tommy Glass. Tommy Glass is from Dayton, Ohio. He looks like a stupid, goofy tourist. He has a sweater draped on his shoulder, glasses, a Polaroid camera around his neck, and he says stuff like, "Golly!" Tommy, he looks and speaks goofy, but he is actually very conniving. And he is the human servant for his lord, known as Dracula. Tommy Glass sits at the table with Hobbs, and they talk. Hobbs knows that Mr. Glass is a servant of Dracula. This is not anything new. Mr. Glass is just another in a long line of human slaves to Dracula. Now, Lyndon Hobbs, he knows that Dracula is in a secure place in the VMS headquarters where he can never be reached, and he knows Mr. Glass will be able to do nothing about it. So Hobbs informs Mr. Glass that he has VMS agents watching their meeting, and they will kill Mr. Glass if he tries anything. Hobbs tells him, "Now, the thing I assume you came here for is sealed away in a place you'll never be able to reach it. So why don't you tell me if there's some other reason you asked me to meet? Because if there isn't, I'd like to have you killed like all the ones before you, so I can go get a proper lunch at the pub over there." Mr. Glass takes out his Polaroid camera, and he takes a picture of Hobbs. Hobbs, growing frustrated, says that Dracula has been in our unbroken possession for more than half a century. None of your wretched kind has been able to free it from the prison we constructed for it, which raises the question, what makes you think you can? Tommy Glass, he gloats that he's working with a group that has a U-boat submarine and has torpedoes, and they pack a real punch. Maybe not enough to punch through 6 feet of concrete, but enough to crack it at least. And sometimes one little crack is all it takes to change things up, am I right? At that exact moment, U-boat submarines under the control of the Soviet Union fire torpedoes, and the torpedoes strike the London Tower Bridge underwater, cracking it. Hobbs hears the explosions, panics, and he runs off. Tommy Glass, he just sits there and just takes Hobbs' picture, celebrating his little victory here. He wanted to capture the look of Hobbs when Hobbs realized that he was defeated. Mr. Glass, looking at the picture, says, "Now that's a keeper." Hobbs, he is running to the London Tower Bridge. He is radioing VMS agents and asking if Dracula's coffin is still secure. When Hobbs finally arrives at the VMS HQ beneath the London Tower Bridge, he sees it is full-on anarchy, and his agents are acting all rabid and killing each other. And Dracula's coffin is also gone. Elsewhere in Europe, over in Paris, we see Gus McCougan. We first saw Gus in 1936 in Volume 2 in Las Vegas, in the Devil in the Sand storyline. He was the son of Cash McCougan, chief of police in Las Vegas, and Lily McCougan. Well, Gus, he was born a little monster due to Skinner's Suite injecting his mother with vampire blood when he was in utero. Well, the next time we saw little Gus McCougan was in Volume 3, in the Survival of the Fittest story arc, which took place in 1941. His father, Cash McCougan, died in that volume, but Felicia Book took little Gus in and administered to him a vampire cure, which she received from a Dr. Pavel in Romania. Well, now it is 1954, and that cure seems to have turned Gus's skin normal, and he can now pass for human. Now, Gus, if he was actually born in 1936 and it's 1954 now, he would be 18 years old. He does not look 18 years old, though. I would guess he's about 12 or 16, somewhere in that range, based on his appearance and the appearance of his classmates. I think because he wasn't given the vampire cure until 1941, his growth and development most likely didn't follow a normal human timeline until then. Anyway, Gus, he's in this class, he is learning various things, and then the school day ends and he leaves school to go home, and his mom is there to meet him and walk him home. His mom is Felicia Book, previous employee of the Vassals of the Morning Star. She left the VMS after 1941, after the events of the Survival of the Fittest story arc, with little Gus, and she has been raising him here in Paris ever since. As they return to their Paris apartment, Felicia tells Gus to go play downstairs with the neighbor boy. Gus, he gladly goes to play with his friend. Felicia, she goes into her apartment alone, as she could smell the blood coming off of Lyndon Hobbs, as Lyndon Hobbs is waiting for her there in her apartment. Felicia, she hasn't been involved with Hobbs or the VMS for many years. Hobbs, he is desperate though. He needs her help. He has nowhere else to turn. Felicia says that she has a son now with Gus and she can't be involved with this anymore. Hobbs tells her about the attack on the London VMS HQ and how the attackers have made off with Dracula, the king of the Carpathian species, the most powerful vampire on Earth, one that if resurrected could potentially control nearly every Carpathian on Earth as his own, a vampire so powerful that mere proximity to him can cause men and women to fly into a murderous rage in which they will kill everyone around them. Issue 2, The Lord of Nightmares. Hobbs explains to Felicia the history of Dracula. He was the first Carpathian vampire. The line was born with him in the early 1400s in the mountains of present-day Romania. The VMS has no idea who Dracula was in his human life. There are theories in the VMS that he was a Romanian lord, but he may have just been a pig farmer. They don't know. The VMS, who apparently was still around hundreds of years ago, did not take the threat of the Carpathian vampires very seriously in the beginning. The Carpathians were not a particularly powerful line, and the VMS was focused on bigger threats. But by the 1700s, Dracula had created one of the most populous vampire threats in Europe. And in the 1800s, Dracula turned the Carpathian vampire species against the rest of the vampire world, and the Carpathian vampires committed genocides against other vampire species, especially the Gaelic vampires. Dracula has the ability to suggest his will over Carpathian vampires and make them do his bidding like an army of drones. Any Carpathian vampire within 1,000 miles is subject to his influence. Now, while Dracula was busy killing other vampires across the globe and came close to exterminating every other vampire species, he eventually turned his attention to the humans. Now, the VMS, they had to step in now, and they lost hundreds of agents trying to bring him down. Finally, in 1872, the VMS got word that Dracula was being transferred to England by ship. So they planned and they managed to overtake his ship and contain him. And Dracula, he was then staked, his throat slit to drain him, his coffin sealed, and he was placed in a specially built container, a vault, to stay. His coffin was then stored at the VMS HQ in London. Felicia asks, if Dracula was staked and drained, then he's dead. Hobbs explains that Dracula survived somehow. In the years that followed his capture, they started to notice signs, an influence emanating from the coffin. An evil, if you will. In 1888, members of the royal family asked if they could see Dracula's bunker. The VMS obliged. The Duke of Clarence, Albert, asked to enter the vault where Dracula was kept to see the container itself. He was allowed in. Later that year, the Duke of Clarence, Albert, he murdered 5 women, prostitutes, butchering them. Scott Snyder here is insinuating that this man was Jack the Ripper, and Jack the Ripper was only influenced to kill these women because of his brief interaction with the coffin of Dracula. From then on, no one was allowed in the vault again. Felicia, hearing all this history over many hours of talking, asks Hobbs if he really thinks Dracula is still alive in there, dormant? And Hobbs answers, absolutely. They talk some more. Gus, who is back from his friend's house, had a nightmare and he interrupts them. Felicia takes Gus to his bedroom and calms his nerves. And he asks if what Hobbs said about Dracula is real, and Felicia tells Gus that they're just stories and for Gus to go back to sleep. When Felicia returns to Hobbs, Hobbs apologizes for coming to see her. He says that this isn't your war anymore. I'll be gone in the morning. Elsewhere in France, we see 2 Russian Soviet Union military men talking. One is named General Zhukov. The other is Corporal Mikhail Bankov. These men are responsible for stealing Dracula's coffin in collaboration with this Mr. Glass, who was acting as Dracula's servant. The Russians have plans to transport Dracula to some mountains in Russia somewhere, as they think they may be able to harness Dracula's power and may be able to use it as some sort of key that will help them in their war with the United States and the rest of the world. Now we see this Tommy Glass arrives by submarine and he talks to these Soviet Union military guys. General Zhukov says that his men will move the coffin now, but Mr. Glass asks for a minute alone with Dracula. Corporal Mikhail Bankov says that we have to leave in less than 4 minutes. And Mr. Glass replies, "We'll be fine, Corporal Bankov." And Corporal Bankov says, "How did you know that? How did you know my name?" And Mr. Glass says, "I know lots of things. I'm his mouth, get it? I speak for him when he's not able to speak for himself. Like now, I'm his smile, but I can also be his bite." Corporal Bankov says to Mr. Glass, "You dare talk to us that way, you American piece of shit?" General Zhukov tells Mr. Glass, "You can have your minute, but you will take off every stitch of clothing. If you tamper with the locks on his coffin, or if you try to feed him anything, if you emerge from that room with so much as a paper cut anywhere on your body, I'll shoot you myself and dump you in the water. He is property of the Soviet Union now, Mr. Glass. See, the Russians, they don't want Dracula woken right now, as Dracula might get too powerful if he is fed anything. They want to get Dracula back to Russia and trap him securely, where then they can try to utilize Dracula's power. This is why they do not want Mr. Glass to feed Dracula or give him any of his blood or anything. So Mr. Glass, he is stripped naked, and then he gets some moments alone with Dracula's coffin. Mr. Glass whispers to Dracula, "My lord, I'm here, your servant, and I brought you something, a goodie. They think I can't serve you, but there is no doorway that can keep me from you." Mr. Glass then regurgitates a dead, bloody rat from his mouth into Dracula's coffin and feeds Dracula with that rat. Mr. Glass then says, "Yes, my lord, yes. Begin to heal, to grow strong. Let your heart beat the drum. Let it sound your will. Let it call to your children." Back over to Felicia's apartment with Gus. Lyndon Hobbs is still there, looking over some files in Felicia's living room. Dracula has now been awoken because he has been fed by Mr. Glass, and Dracula manages to spread his influence many miles all the way over to Gus. And Dracula is commanding Gus to kill Lyndon Hobbs. Gus walks into the living room, brandishing a butcher knife, and he has a crazy look in his eyes. And Hobbs asks Gus if he needs something, and Gus replies, "Yes, Mr. Hobbs, I do. I need to kill you." Issue 3. Gus attacks Lyndon Hobbs. Lyndon, he recognizes instantly what is happening. He tells Gus that he needs to fight him, resist Dracula's influence. Gus, he swings the butcher knife and nicks Hobbs' leg a bit. Gus is still moving towards Hobbs, but Felicia comes into the room and she whacks Gus in the head, knocking him out. A day later, Hobbs, Felicia, and Gus are traveling. They are in central Germany. Hobbs has given Gus a tincture of medicine made from the blood derivative of the first species to branch off from the Carpathians around 1650. That particular sub-Carpathian vampire species happened to be immune from Dracula's influence. They even tried to rebel against him, so Dracula wanted them wiped out, and they were. But the VMS managed to save some of the blood from that vampire species, and they now use it to stave off Dracula's influence and make sure he doesn't get into their minds. Felicia asks how Dracula was able to control Gus. Hobbs says that Dracula shouldn't be that powerful yet, unless the Russians were stupid enough to feed him blood. But Hobbs, he's still a little puzzled, as usually Dracula can only control humans from close proximity and Carpathians from vast distances, so it is odd that Dracula could control Gus. Eventually, the train stops, and Hobbs tells Felicia that this is their stop. They get out. It appears to be in the middle of nowhere with nothing but snow around them. Hobbs tells Felicia and Gus to follow him. We jump back over to those Russians and Mr. Glass. Dracula has now been awakened, and he is trying to control the influence of the humans around him. Dracula has managed to use his influence to take control of Corporal Mikhail Bankov. Bankov, crazed, says, "There's nowhere to go anymore, though the danger is here. It is upon you." He tries to attack the other Russian military guys, but he gets shot in the head and killed by General Zhukov. General Zhukov, talking to Mr. Glass, tells him that, "Mr. Glass, your master has made a grave mistake. Mikhail was the only one of us who chose not to take the medicine that prevents Dracula from entering their minds, but the rest of them did in fact take that medicine. So this General Zhukov and his men have the same medicine that Hobbs has that helps people not fall under Dracula's influence. Mr. Glass does not seem intimidated though. General Zhukov tells Mr. Glass that his orders from Russia were simple. He was to acquire the monster, the one they call the King of the Undead, and they were to transport him by train back to Moscow. But if the monster showed any signs of resistance or insolence, he is to destroy the monster. So that is what he is going to do now, and he will take pleasure in it. Mr. Glass, he is just smiling, and then he takes the general's picture. See, Mr. Glass, he knows that Dracula has some more tricks up his sleeve now that he's been fed. We see that Dracula's red eyes coming out from his coffin down below. Dracula is now controlling an army of Carpathian vampires, and they appear to be on the train, killing all the humans and taking it over, and they will soon combat the Russians here. Back over to Hobbs, Felicia, and Gus. They are walking in the snow in Germany where they got off the train that they were on. As they are walking, they get attacked by a ferocious gray monster. Hobbs tries talking to the monster. Felicia grabs a branch and forms a stake and is going to kill the gray monster. All of a sudden, a pale woman with orange hair whacks Felicia and knocks her back and then points a gun at her. Felicia continues wrestling with the orange-haired woman. She overpowers her, and then Felicia is pointing the gun at the gray monster that attacked Hobbs. But there's a third monster here, and it attacks Felicia from behind and knocks her out. When Felicia wakes up, her, Hobbs, and Gus are being held captive by the three individuals that they fought in the snow. These three individuals that attacked them are part of a group called the Firsts. They are a resistance group made up of species of Homo habilis that predate the Carpathian line. They have got nearly 100 members around the globe, many of whom are the last of their particular line of vampires. All of them have been wiped out by the Carpathians when the Carpathians were trying to genocide all the vampires on the planet. The three members of the First here are Aiden, who is the pale female with the orange hair and red eyes, Benedict, who appears to be the leader of these three, and Brune, who is a gargoyle-type vampire. After introductions are made and confusion is cleared up, Hobbs is talking to them about how Dracula is free and he wants their help, and he asks what are they going to do about Dracula being free. Benedict laughs. The Firsts are not friends of the VMS. They aren't going to do anything. They're going to do what they've always done: survive. Hobbs accuses them of just hiding and being cowards. They all start arguing. Gus, he interrupts them though. He screams. He senses what Dracula has been up to. He senses that Dracula, through his influence, has killed all of the Russians, and that Dracula has sent a separate army of Carpathian vampires headed towards them. And Gus says, and now they're here. So a large Carpathian swarm of vampires sent by Dracula is now closing in on all of them. Issue 4. The Carpathian vampires, being controlled by Dracula's influence, are outside the hidden tunnel nearby where Hobbs, Felicia, Gus, and the members of the Firsts are and are talking. So down below, Hobbs and Benedict are arguing. Benedict accuses Hobbs of trying to scare them and bringing these vampires upon them. And Hobbs tells Benedict, "You think I brought these bastards down on you? It was him, Dracula." The Carpathian vampires open the door to the First's underground tunnel. Down below, Aiden says that they're trap on the door didn't work, and the vampires are now in the tunnels and they're going to be approaching any minute. Hobbs, he tells Benedict that he knows Benedict struck a deal with the Russians to free Dracula. He knows that Benedict gave the Russians the tincture medicine to protect themselves from Dracula's influence. But what Benedict doesn't know is that Dracula has now killed all of the Russians and is in possession of an army of Carpathian vampires, and he has now sent them right to Benedict's doorstep. Alright, just hitting pause on the story here and to explain what's going on, because I found that pretty confusing as I was reading. So, this group called the Firsts, they're a group of vampires that are almost extinct of various kinds of species of vampires. Now, these group of the Firsts, they are enemies of the Carpathian vampires because the Carpathians committed genocide on their various kind. But the Firsts, they are still vampires, and they are not particularly friendly with the Vassals of the Morning Star either. So this Benedict in the First, he made some sort of deal with the Russians to help them steal Dracula. He gave them the tincture medicine to protect themselves. Why did Benedict help the Russians steal Dracula? Mostly because he doesn't like the VMS and he wanted to mess with them. Benedict just assumed the Russians would keep Dracula locked up and maybe try to mess with him a bit, but they wouldn't free Dracula. But of course, if Dracula did get free, that would not be good for anybody. And that is, of course, what did happen, so Hobbs tells Benedict to free the three of them. Dracula is on the loose, and he is after Gus, and we should not give Dracula Gus. Benedict asks, what does he want with the boy? And Hobbs answers, I don't know, but I'm as eager to find out as you. Just free us. We're all on the same side here. Benedict, he comes over to Hobbs' side of thinking in the matter, and he frees the three of them. And he realizes that they need to work together here. He tells Aiden to ready the cannon, and tells Brune to let the Carpathian vampires pile in. The Carpathians, they enter the room and they get obliterated by the light cannon. Benedict, Aiden, Brune, Hobbs, Felicia, and Gus all run away. Benedict leads them to an escape hatch which will lead outdoors. In the escape hatch, Benedict has a small plane. The six of them pile into it and then they take off, escaping safely into the air. Now, in the safety of the escape plane, Hobbs asks Benedict where the Russians were planning on taking Dracula. Benedict tells Hobbs the Russians were taking Dracula to a military base in the heart of Moscow, where he was to remain in their possession doing their bidding for the next 100 years or so. Now Benedict, he doesn't want to fight. He still thinks the Russians probably have Dracula safely in their care. Benedict orders the plane to be flown north. But Hobbs, he says that they need to deal with Dracula now, and that deep down Benedict knows that he's right. Hobbs accuses Benedict of just running, and this really pisses Benedict off. He begins turning into his vampire form and he tells Hobbs, and what do you know of running, Hobbs? You who've always had the men, the weapons, the secret government support, you and your VMS. Dracula, he chased us to the brink of extinction, but you were more than happy to pick up the torch while he's been gone. Are we running? Sure, we're good at it. Let's see how good you are at it, though, you and your friends who've never known what it's like to have him after you, to live in fear of him, with nothing but him in your frickin' minds day in and day out. Let's see how you like it. Lyndon Hobbs, though, he does have some personal experience with Dracula. He has had a run-in with him in the past, and Hobbs begins to tell Benedict his story. When Hobbs was 21 years old, in 1917, he was working in London with the police. By the way, this means that Hobbs is actually British, which I don't think was clearly established before this. Nevertheless, though, he was working in London with the police. He was married. He had a wife named Annette and a son named William. He was patrolling the streets. when all of a sudden a truck turned the corner and it was being chased by police. It was coming in fast and dangerously, swerving all over the place. Hobbs yelled at the driver of the truck to stop, but the driver only sped up. Hobbs, he then shot and killed the man driving the truck, and the truck crashed. It turns out that that man driving that truck was Dracula's human slave at the time. Just as how Mr. Glass is Dracula's slave now, that man in 1917 that was driving the truck had managed to organize a raid on the London Tower complex and actually managed to break in and extract Dracula's coffin. And it was in the back of his truck there. Hobbs went to go look in the back of that truck, and he saw Dracula's coffin right there in front of him, and it was cracked open, just a sliver. VMS agents came rushing over, but Hobbs, he was already looking at that coffin. He couldn't see anything inside of it, only blackness. And that was the last thing that Lyndon Hobbs remembered that day, because Dracula took over Hobbs's mind. His whole memory went blank, and the next thing Hobbs remembered is that he woke up the next day in custody in a jail cell. Hobbs, under Dracula's control, had killed his own wife and child with an axe. Hobbs had fallen victim to Dracula's will. Soon after that incident, the Vassals of the Morning Star took Hobbs in and gave him a new life in their organization. Damn, that is one hell of a backstory for Lyndon Hobbs. Hobbs tells Benedict, "So tell me again, I don't know what it's like to live my whole life with him in my mind every day. Go ahead, tell me." Now maybe you're right about the Soviets. Maybe he is safely in their possession, on his way to Moscow where he'll be forever imprisoned and harmless to you. I hope you are right. And all I'm asking you to do is to be sure. Follow the train carrying his body. See if all is going to plan. If he's tucked away, then so be it. But don't you owe it to yourselves to be sure? The vampire Brune, listening to Hobbs' argument, says to Benedict, "He's right." And Aiden tells Benedict, "We need to be sure." And Benedict, being faced with a compelling argument, agrees with Hobbs. They need to make sure that Dracula is not freed. Benedict gets them to change the direction of their plane and follow the train tracks the Russians should be using with Dracula. So some time passes and they are flying over these train tracks, and they all of a sudden see the bodies of various Russian military men that are dying in the snow. So they land the plane and investigate. They find the Russian General Zhukov crawling in the snow, very badly injured and dying, but still alive. Hobbs talks to him and asks him what happened to the train carrying the coffin. And Zhukov says that it's still on its way to Moscow, but Dracula isn't on it. Mr. Glass, the one that speaks for Dracula, he removed the coffin from the train, and he has made off with the Dracula in a caravan of cars. Hobbs asks where Mr. Glass is taking Dracula, and Zhukov answers that Mr. Glass said that he was taking Dracula home. Hobbs, he tells the others that if they're taking Dracula home, Dracula's castle is in a fortress on a small island in the Black Sea off the coast of Romania, so that's probably where they're headed. Zhukov says, "There is a second throne, you must stop him from reaching it." General Zhukov then dies. Benedict, hearing all this, tells Hobbs that he was right. Benedict still wants to hightail it and run, but Hobbs says they have to go after him and stop him from reaching the castle and his throne. Hobbs, he reveals these documents he found on one of the high-ranking men near the train tracks, and the documents show images of an amplifier device. Hobbs says the VMS tried to build one themselves at their headquarters back in 1943 to see if they could tamper with Dracula's influence use him to their advantage, but they soon realized it was too dangerous to explore. But if Dracula gets on his throne and uses the amplifier device, it'll project his influence to every vampire on Earth. And if we let him reach that castle and get hooked up to that thing, there won't be a place left on the planet to hide. It'll be the end of us all. Issue 5. Some time has passed. Hobbs, Felicia, Gus, Benedict, Aiden, and Brune are all in a boat, sailing in the Black Sea, on their way to Dracula's castle on an island there. Brune can apparently see nearly 5 miles, even at night, so he is perched high up above as a lookout. Felicia explains the plan to Gus. Any minute now, they will spot Dracula's ship, and when they do, her, Aiden, and Gus will go hide down below deck, and Hobbs and Benedict are going to take a lifeboat and try to get close enough to sink Dracula's ship before Dracula reaches the island with his castle on it. And because Dracula and the rest of the Carpathian vampires can't swim, it should kill them all. They'll all drown. Brune up above, he spots Dracula's ship. Hobbs and Benedict prepare to go after that ship in a lifeboat. Now Gus, he tells Felicia that she should go too to help. She's half vampire, she's tough like Benedict, Brune, and Aiden. It's her job to go. He wants her to do it for him. Felicia, she agrees. She's gonna help Hobbs out. She hugs her son and gets ready to go. Benedict, Hobbs, and Felicia head off in a lifeboat after Dracula. Felicia tells Hobbs that she wonders if she made the right choice, raising Gus off the grid away from the kind of childhood she had growing up with the VMS and her mom, Abelina. She admits that she misses it, the VMS. She misses doing good and being a part of something bigger. Hobbs, having a heart-to-heart with Felicia, tells her, "I was always torn about your mother's decision to raise you in our world, Felicia. I'd have you know that, but I'd also have you know that the woman you've become is something to be proud of." Hobbs, he also apologizes to Benedict. He says that the VMS's war should have always been against the Carpathians and Dracula, but they let their fears get the best of them and they went after all the vampires. Benedict tells Hobbs to not get all soft on him now. The lifeboat gets close to Dracula's ship. They attach a bomb to the side of Dracula's boat, and then they steer away from it and blow the bomb, and it explodes, but damn, it was not powerful enough. Dracula's ship is still fine and is still sailing. Hobbs says that they're gonna have to blow up the ship from the inside, then they are going to have to board Dracula's ship. Aiden, Brune, and Gus are watching from a distance. All of a sudden, Mr. Glass in scuba gear grabs the side of their boat. He climbs out, and then Mr. Glass, looking at Brune, says, "Let's see, a touch of mercury for you?" And he shoots Brune with a mercury bullet. And then looking at Aiden, Mr. Glass says, "And a touch of phosphorus for you." And she gets shot with a special phosphorus bullet and Aiden goes down. Mr. Glass then removes his scuba mask and smiles at Gus, and Gus realizes he is all alone. Over on Dracula's boat, Felicia, Hobbs, and Benedict have boarded and are killing tons of Carpathian vampires, blasting away at them. But Felicia, she spots that Gus is in trouble, and Hobbs tells her to take the lifeboat and go get Gus. Felicia doesn't want to leave Hobbs stranded here, but Hobbs says he'll be fine, he can swim, these vampires can't. So Felicia's going back to save Gus. Back over to Gus, Mr. Glass is walking towards him. Gus, only armed with a flare gun, fires it at Mr. Glass's face. Mr. Glass gets burned, his face is just all charred. Mr. Glass tells Gus, "Ouch, you broke my glasses, Gus. I might have to punish you for that." Back over to Dracula's boat. Hobbs and Benedict are fighting through the Carpathians aboard the deck. Benedict says they need to get down below. He tells Hobbs to go, even grabs Hobbs and shoves him through the door and closes it behind him. Benedict is going to stay up top and try to hold off some of the Carpathians up there, hold them back, buying Hobbs some time to get even lower. Hobbs, he descends down a staircase. The lights are red. Back over to Gus. Mr. Glass is trying to find Gus. Gus, he's running through the ship and hiding. Mr. Glass says that his master really wants him to find Gus. He has special plans for Gus. Eventually, Mr. Glass grabs Gus by his hair. Back over to Dracula's boat. Hobbs is below deck trying to find Dracula. Dracula, though, starts messing with Hobbs's mind, showing Hobbs images of his wife and son that are dead, that he killed. Hobbs says, "William, Annette? No, you're not real. You can't be real." Hobbs then imagines his son William saying, "We are real, Daddy. Please don't hurt us again." Hobbs tells Dracula to stop it, stop it! Hobbs is trying to ignore Dracula's influence on his mind. But Hobbs's son continues, "Why stop though, Daddy, when it's so much fun?" Finally, we see Dracula in person. Dracula rips Hobbs's arm off his body, and then he rips Hobbs's leg off. So Hobbs is missing an arm and a leg, and he screams in pain. Dracula, seeing the dynamite that Hobbs brought with him, mocks him. Speaking to Hobbs through the voice of Hobbs's dead wife and child, he says, "Oh, Lyndon, are you going for the dynamite? Trying to light the fuse? I'm afraid we can't let you do that. You won't kill us this time. Not again. No lighting the fuse." Dracula continues stabbing into Hobbs, and Hobbs is screaming. Hobbs, he's dying. He's moments away from death, but he says, It's not a fuse. It's a timer." Dracula shoots a surprised face, realizing what this means. And Hobbs ends by saying, "Hope you brought your swim trunks, asshole." Boom! The bomb that Hobbs brought explodes Dracula's ship. Hobbs did it. He killed Dracula. Felicia, she arrives on the other boat with Aiden and Brune down. She starts running around looking for Gus. She's yelling his name, "Gus!" She runs and she finally sees Gus. And Gus has turned into a vampire and has killed Mr. Glass. Gus is safe though, and Gus tells his mom, "I didn't mean to, Mom." Felicia hugs her son. He is alive. In the aftermath of all this, Felicia and Gus have made their way to safety. They are back at a Vassals of the Morning Star base, and Gus is being checked on by a doctor. And Felicia is talking to a high-ranking Vassals of the Morning Star agent named Agent Bixby. Agent Bixby informs her that they have ran a battery of tests on Gus and he's gonna be alright, but he is in fact an American vampire. Despite Felicia giving him a cure, it appears the American strain is too powerful for it. The serum managed to suppress the vampire qualities in Gus, but it didn't eradicate the vampirism from his blood. It was always there, waiting to be expressed. They suspect that Dracula knew this, that this was why Dracula was after Gus, to help him make a new population of American vampires that Dracula himself could control, much like the Carpathians. It would be a new army for him. Luckily, Agent Bixby says that Dracula, that evil son of a bitch, is resting in peace for good at the bottom of the Black Sea. Bixby tells Felicia that Hobbs often spoke of her and Gus. He called Felicia the best the VMS ever had, and he had always hoped that she would come back. Felicia says that she thought she could keep away from all this, but she was born into it, and her and Gus are a part of this war, whether they like it or not. Felicia, she tells Agent Bixby that She wants back in. She wants to be an agent once again. She says that she's reporting for duty. She asks if she would be reporting into him, as he's the new head of the VMS. But Bixby tells Felicia, actually, you are. Hobbs actually requested that Felicia be his successor and lead the VMS. Felicia, hearing this, says that she can't. She's been gone too long. She wouldn't know where to start. She'd be all new to it all over again. But Bixby tells her that's why Hobbs wanted her. In the last few years, he'd grown to taking the VMS into a new direction. Bixby continues, I think Hobbs and all of us in the higher ranks have realized that this war, it's not against vampires anymore, it's against evil. And if that means making new allies, well, we're all for it. What this means is that we're going to start seeing the VMS making some allies with other vampire species that are friendly, like some of the members of the First, like Benedict, Brune, and Aiden. And they're going to focus their efforts more solely on the evil vampires like the Carpathians. All of a sudden, Gus calls for his mom. He asks if we can go outside now, and Felicia says, sure we can. Felicia takes Gus outside and says, come on, I'll buy you a pop. I want to talk to you about some things. I want to tell you all about your dad. And that is how the Lord of Nightmares miniseries ends. Alright, that was the Lord of Nightmares story arc. First, let me go through the things I liked. I really liked Dracula. I thought he was a really imposing, really powerful. How in God's name do you overcome him? He can control all these Carpathians across the world. He can even control humans. So I thought he was really cool, and I really liked to see the way that they beat him. I thought Lyndon Hobbs having his hero moment, killing Dracula, was a spectacular send-off for a very important character. I will say, though, I did not think that Lyndon Hobbs was British, and I was very surprised when apparently he was. He was written like an American this entire time to me, so the fact that he's British threw me for a loop a bit. Mr. Glass, I thought he was a compelling villain. I liked that he was very dorky, but yet pure evil inside, because he was being controlled by Dracula. I thought Gus and Felicia had an interesting story with where they were the past several years, living in secret in Paris, Felicia raising Gus, so that was good. Although, the nerd in me couldn't help doing the math, okay? Gus was born in 1936, and it's 1954 right now. He should be 18 years old, but he is clearly drawn to be like 13 or 14, especially if you look at his little classmates. So, what's going on there, man? I feel like on that episode of The Simpsons, when that nerd is questioning someone who worked on Itchy and Scratchy.
From Miss Bellamy. In episode 2F09, when Itchy plays Scratchy's skeleton like a xylophone, he strikes the same rib twice in succession, yet he produces two clearly different tones. I mean, what are we, to believe that this is some sort of a magic xylophone or something? Boy, I really hope somebody got fired for that blunder.
So yeah, the Gus's age thing bothered me. I was also just immensely confused at a lot of the story. I felt it was overly complicated, especially this whole thing with the plan with Dracula. So the Russians steal Dracula. They want to bring him to Russia. Lyndon Hobbs, Gus, and Felicia take a train to Germany because they want to visit the Firsts. But then Dracula gets fed. He influences all these Carpathian vampires, and they attack the Russians and free him. And then I guess he sends a separate group of Carpathians to take out Lyndon Hobbs, Gus, and Felicia, or something. But then the Firsts also play into it, and they had their own deal with the Russians. But then Mr. Glass, he also has his whole deal with the Russians, but then he's double-crossing them. Oh my god, it was just like so confusing. I believe I understand it all now, but I read this story very carefully because I had to produce this video for you all. I can't imagine a regular reader of this particular story arc being able to clearly follow everything. But anyway, Dracula was still a badass, and he pretty much made this volume what it is, and it was pretty entertaining. But because of the confusing parts of it, I'm going to give this volume a 7 out of 10. Still good, but not my favorite. Thank you all for watching. I will be back next week with Volume 5, Part 2, which is the final volume in the first cycle of American Vampire, so it is going to be a big one.